I wasn't looking for another woman. That's a lie. I was actively, aggressively, not looking for another woman. I was in a state of deliberate emotional hibernation, burrowed deep into the lumpy cushions of my best friend Maya's sofa, a place I'd called home for the past 3 weeks. My own apartment, the one I'd once shared with Sarah, felt like a mausoleum, every surface coated in the invisible residue of betrayal. Here, at Maya's, the air was different. It smelled of her chaotic energy, lavender laundry detergent, burnt toast, and the faint sweet scent of the oil paints she left uncapped. The apartment was a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that was trying to be charming, but was mostly just old. Sunlight, thick with the dust motes of a city that never slept, streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating the geography of my temporary refuge. It was a landscape of stacked books, half-empty mugs, and a thriving pothos plant that Maya swore was immortal. This carefully constructed cocoon of platonic safety was my entire world, and I had no intention of letting anyone else in. The sound of a key in the front door lock was a sharp, metallic intrusion. I didn't even look up from the book I wasn't reading. Maya had a habit of forgetting things: her wallet, her headphones, her sense of direction. It was probably just her, back for the third time today. Maya, if you forgot your reusable grocery bags again, I swear I'm going to staple them to your forehead. I mumbled into a pillow. A low melodic chuckle that was decidedly not Maya's filled the space. I'll be sure to pass that along. My head snapped up. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright hallway light, was a woman I had never seen before. She was tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe, and she held a worn leather duffel bag in one hand. She stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind her, and the light fell across her face. She had rich, dark skin, high cheekbones, and eyes so dark they seemed to hold the quiet of a forest at dusk. Her hair was styled in intricate braids that were woven with threads of deep blue, catching the light as she moved. She wore a simple gray t-shirt and dark jeans, clothes that spoke of comfort and practicality. Yet on her, they looked like a deliberate choice, an expression of effortless confidence I couldn't remember ever possessing. She set her bag down with a soft thud, the sound echoing in the sudden, thick silence of the apartment. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the chaotic tableau of Maya's life and my pathetic occupation of its epicenter, before landing on me. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a calm, unhurried assessment. It was more unnerving than any criticism. "You must be Chloe," she said. Her voice was even deeper than her laugh, a smooth, warm sound like aged whiskey. "Maya's told me about you." My heart did a painful little stutter step in my chest. Maya had told her about me. What had she told her? That I was the pathetic friend who fell apart after her girlfriend of 4 years revealed she'd been sleeping with her spin instructor. That I subsisted on a diet of cereal and self-pity. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I pulled the Afghan Maya's grandmother had knitted tighter around me, a useless shield. "And you are?" The words came out sharper than I intended, a defense mechanism honed to a razor's edge over the last month. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Lena, her cousin." Of course, Lena, the cousin from Seattle, the one who designed gardens and was, according to Maya, impossibly chill. Maya had mentioned she might be visiting sometime this season, a vague, distant eventuality I had immediately filed away and forgotten. It seemed the eventuality had arrived, carrying a leather duffel and an aura of disconcerting calm, and was now standing in the middle of my sanctuary. The fortress I'd built around myself suddenly felt flimsy, made of pillows and blankets, easily breached by a stranger with kind, knowing eyes. My hibernation was officially over. A new, unwelcome presence had just entered the den. Just then, the door burst open again, and Maya herself tumbled in, arms laden with actual grocery bags, the reusable kind. "I forgot the oat milk," she declared, breathless before freezing at the scene. "Oh, you're here, and you've met." Maya dropped the bags on the floor with a thud, sending a carton of eggs skittering dangerously. "Lena, you made it. Chloe, this is my cousin Lena. Lena, this is Chloe, my emotional support human who is currently camping on my couch." She said it all with a breezy cheerfulness that made me want to sink directly through the floorboards. Lena's smile finally reached her eyes as she looked at Maya. "It's good to see you, May. And Chloe." She nodded toward me again, her expression unreadable. "It's good to meet you." "Yeah, you too," I managed, my voice tight. The apartment, which had felt like a cozy nest just moments before, now seemed claustrophobically small. It was designed for one person's chaos, barely tolerated a second's sorrow, and was definitely not equipped for a third, especially one who radiated such a potent, grounded energy. It was like trying to fit an old-growth redwood into a terracotta pot. "So the plan is," Maya began, already unpacking groceries with frantic energy. "Lena, you can take my room, obviously. Chloe's got the couch fort on lockdown, and I will figure it out. Maybe an air mattress? It'll be like a slumber party. A very crowded adult slumber party with more debt and existential dread." I felt a fresh wave of mortification. I was a guest, a long-term burdensome guest, and now I was displacing the actual family. "No, that's ridiculous. I can go. I can find a hotel or something." The thought of navigating the logistics of that, of leaving this safe space, sent a spike of pure panic through me. "Absolutely not," Maya and Lena said in unison. Their voices, one bright and bubbly, the other low and steady, harmonized in a way that was both strange and definitive. Lena picked up the carton of eggs, checking for cracks. "Don't be silly. I'm the one who showed up unannounced. We'll make it work. It's just for a few days." Her gaze flickered over to me, and for a second, I felt like she could see right through my blustering offer to the terror underneath. "We're all adults. We can share a bathroom without incident. Probably." The corner of her mouth twitched again. That restrained humor. It was quiet, something you had to pay attention to. And for some reason, that irritated me more than outright laughter would have. It felt like a private joke I wasn't in on. Maya, oblivious to the subtle currents of tension, clapped her hands together. "Perfect. This is going to be so fun." Fun was not the word I would have chosen. The next morning, the reality of our new arrangement set in. Maya's work phone began ringing at 6 a.m. with some kind of crisis involving a shipment to Belgium. By 7, she was dressed, stressed, and hugging us both goodbye. "I am so sorry," she said, her words a frantic rush. "My boss needs me in the London office. Like yesterday. The flight is in 4 hours. I have to go. I'll be back in a week, maybe 10 days. Everything is on fire." And just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving Lena and me in a silence that was heavier and more profound than the one that had existed before. The buffer was gone. It was just me, her, and 72 square feet of shared living space. The redwood was now firmly planted in the pot, and I was the bonsai tree cowering in its shade. "Well," Lena said, pouring hot water over coffee grounds in a French press. The simple, methodical action seemed to calm the frantic energy Maya had left in her wake. "I guess it's just us." "Looks like it," I said, my voice flat. I was acutely aware of my state of dress, an oversized worn-out band t-shirt and plaid pajama pants that had seen better days. Lena, by contrast, was already dressed in dark jeans and a soft-looking Henley, her braids tied back from her face. She looked awake, present, and capable. I felt like a rumpled caricature of a heartbroken woman. The smallness of the apartment became a tangible thing, a presence in the room. We developed a clumsy choreography, a dance of avoidance and reluctant proximity. When she was in the kitchen, I stayed on the couch. When I needed the bathroom, I'd listen for the sound of her moving around in Maya's bedroom before making a dash for it. We were two celestial bodies trapped in a gravitational pull we couldn't escape, forced to orbit each other in polite, strained silence. It was the little things I started to notice, the details that emerged in the quiet observation deck of the living room. Lena had a scent, something clean and earthy like freshly turned soil after a rainstorm, mixed with the warm, woody notes of sandalwood. It clung to the air after she passed through a room. She hummed when she was concentrating, a low, tuneless sound that was surprisingly soothing. She had a small silver ring on her thumb that she would twist when she was thinking. Her hands were remarkable, long-fingered and strong, with dirt permanently etched under her nails, the hands of someone who builds things, who coaxes life from the ground. They were a stark contrast to Sarah's, which had always been perfectly manicured, soft, and ultimately treacherous. One afternoon, I watched from my sofa perch as Lena tackled Maya's doom corner, a pile of mail, magazines, and miscellaneous objects that had been threatening to achieve sentience. She didn't just clean it, she curated it. She sorted the mail, recycled the junk, and stacked the magazines into a neat, aesthetically pleasing pile. She moved with an unhurried efficiency that was both mesmerizing and deeply irritating. My own life was a sprawling mess, an emotional doom corner I couldn't even begin to sort through. And here she was, calmly organizing someone else's clutter. "You don't have to do that," I said, the words emerging from my cocoon. She didn't look up from her task. "I know, but I can't think when my environment is chaotic." She paused, then glanced over at me, a directness in her gaze that made me feel pinned to the cushions. "It helps me feel grounded." Grounded, that was the word. She was rooted to the earth while I was floating, untethered and lost in the ether of my own misery. Later that day, she made a pot of coffee and, without a word, poured a second mug and placed it on the small end table beside the couch. It was a simple gesture, an offering of warmth that asked for nothing in return. I stared at the steam rising from the dark liquid, a fragile white flag in the cold war of our cohabitation. I didn't say thank you, but I drank every last drop. The truce, it seemed, had begun. The turning point came on the third night. A thunderstorm rolled in, a dramatic, showy affair that rattled the old window panes and plunged the street into a flickering, theatrical darkness. The power went out with a final, decisive clap of thunder, leaving us in an abrupt, velvety blackness. I flinched, a stupid, reflexive action. I'd always hated thunderstorms. Sarah had loved them. She'd loved the drama, the way the sky felt like it was breaking open. She'd always tried to drag me out onto our little balcony to feel the energy, while all I felt was a primal, anxious urge to hide under a bed. A soft scraping sound came from the direction of the kitchen, followed by the flare of a match. A moment later, a warm, flickering glow filled the room. Lena was standing by the counter, a trio of candles in her hand. She placed them on the coffee table, their small flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She looked less like a redwood in the soft light, and more like something ancient and elemental herself. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low and calm, cutting through the percussive rhythm of the rain against the glass. "Fine," I said, my voice a little too high. "Just a storm." She didn't call me out on the lie. She just sat down in the armchair across from me, the one Maya usually threw her coats on. The space between us felt both vast and incredibly intimate in the candlelight. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. It felt safer in here, with the tiny, defiant flames holding the darkness at bay. "Maya's worried about you," Lena said finally, her voice so soft I almost didn't catch it. I bristled. "I'm fine." "Okay." She didn't push. She just watched the candle flames, her profile etched in golden shadow. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. Less like a void and more like a space waiting to be filled. My own defenses, worn down by grief and exhaustion, suddenly felt paper thin. It's just, the words came out before I could stop them. A crack in the dam. Relationships. They're a special kind of nightmare, aren't they? I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded ugly in the quiet room. Lena was silent for a long moment. I thought maybe she'd ignore the comment, let it drift away into the storm-filled night. But then she spoke, her gaze still fixed on the flames. They can be, but sometimes the quiet after the storm is the hardest part. All the debris is just there, and you're the only one left to clean it up. My breath caught in my throat. Debris. That was exactly what it felt like. I was sitting in the wreckage of my own life, a landscape of splintered trust and shattered expectations. She had given my shapeless pain a name, and in doing so, had made it feel real, acknowledged, seen. For the first time since she'd arrived, I looked at her, really looked at her, and didn't feel irritated or invaded. I felt a flicker of something else, something I couldn't name. It was a terrifying, unfamiliar warmth spreading through my chest, like the first rays of sun on a frozen landscape. I hugged my knees to my chest, the scratchy wool of the Afghan a familiar comfort, and watched the woman across from me, her face illuminated by the flickering firelight, and felt the first tentative thaw begin. The next morning the power was back on, and the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and smelling of wet asphalt and green leaves. The tension in the apartment had dissipated along with the low-pressure system. It was replaced by a quiet, tentative ease. As I was making myself a bowl of cereal, Lena came into the kitchen, her sketchbook and a collection of pencils under her arm. "Morning," she said, her voice still a little rough with sleep. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching me. "Morning," I replied, surprised that the word didn't get stuck in my throat. She opened her sketchbook on the small kitchen table. It was filled with intricate drawings of plants, detailed layouts of parks and pathways, and sweeping landscapes that seemed to breathe on the page. "This is what I do," she said, almost shyly. "I design public gardens, community spaces." I came over to look, drawn in by the confident lines and the obvious love evident in every pencil stroke. One design was for a small, forgotten pocket park wedged between two towering office buildings. She'd filled it with native plants, a winding stone path, and a series of curved benches designed to encourage conversation. "It's beautiful," I said, and I meant it. She traced a line on the page with her finger, the one with the silver ring. "This one was my first big project after I started my own firm. It was a complete disaster." I looked up at her, surprised. "What happened?" "Everything," she said with a wry smile. "The city changed the zoning laws halfway through. The soil was more contaminated than the initial tests showed. We had a freak hailstorm that destroyed half the young plantings. My main investor pulled out." She shook her head, but there was no bitterness in the gesture, only the memory of a hard-won lesson. I thought it was the end. I'd poured everything I had into it. Money, time, all of it. I felt like a total failure. I knew that feeling. The hollowed-out certainty that you had messed up so completely that there was no way back. "So, what did you do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I sat in the middle of that muddy, half-ruined park for a whole afternoon, and I cried," she said simply. "And then I went back to my office, redrew the entire plan to accommodate the new reality, found a new investor who believed in planting things in forgotten places, and I finished it. It took another year, but it got done." She finally looked up from the book and met my eyes. "Sometimes things have to fall apart completely before you can figure out how to build them stronger." Her vulnerability was a quiet gift. She wasn't just showing me her work. She was showing me her scars, the places where she had been broken and had healed over. She was matching my quiet confession in the dark with one of her own in the bright morning light. It was an act of profound trust, a leveling of the ground between us. I was no longer just the pathetic friend on the couch, and she was no longer the intimidatingly perfect stranger. We were just two people who understood what it felt like to stand in the debris of something that had been destroyed, figuring out where to even begin rebuilding. A comfortable silence settled between us, filled only by the scratching of her pencil as she began a new sketch and the quiet crunch of my cereal. For the first time in a month, my food didn't taste like ash. That evening, we decided to cook. It was a mutual, unspoken agreement that eating cereal for dinner for a fourth consecutive night was a bridge too far, even for me. We found a recipe for lentil soup in one of Maya's cookbooks and set about deciphering her chaotic pantry. The kitchen was small, a narrow galley that forced a constant close-quarters negotiation of space. "Behind you," I'd murmur, reaching for the olive oil. "Sorry, just need to get to that drawer," she'd say, her arm brushing against my back. Each accidental touch was like a static shock, a brief, surprising jolt that left my skin tingling long after she'd moved away. We fell into an easy rhythm. I chopped onions and carrots, my eyes watering, while she measured out spices, her movements precise and economical. She put on music, a playlist of old soul that filled the small apartment with warmth and melody. For a little while, I forgot to be miserable. I forgot the ache in my chest that had been my constant companion for weeks. We were just two women making soup, surrounded by the mellow voices of Etta James and Al Green. I needed the cumin from the spice rack above the stove. I reached for it at the same moment she did. Our hands met over the small glass jar, her fingers warm and firm against mine. It wasn't a brush. It was a connection. A solid, undeniable point of contact. The world seemed to slow down, the music fading into a distant hum. All I could feel was the heat of her skin, the slight roughness of a callus on her thumb against my palm. All I could smell was her scent, sandalwood and rain-soaked earth, mingling with the savory aroma of sautéing garlic. I looked up, and she was already looking at me, her dark eyes wide and unblinking. The air between us grew thick, charged with a sudden, palpable energy. It was a moment of pure, terrifying recognition. This wasn't just comfort. This wasn't just camaraderie. This was something else entirely. I snatched my hand back as if the jar were red hot. "Sorry," I mumbled, my face burning. "No, my fault," she said, her voice a little husky. She handed me the cumin, her fingers deliberately avoiding mine. The spell was broken, but the residual magic lingered in the air for the rest of the night. We ate the soup on the couch, watching some mindless action movie. But I wasn't watching the screen. I was hyper-aware of her presence beside me, of the 3 inches of worn cushion that separated her thigh from mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, a magnetic pull that I had to consciously resist. When she laughed at a particularly bad one-liner from the film's hero, the sound was a deep, rich rumble that vibrated through the sofa cushions and settled somewhere deep in my sternum. And in that moment, a horrifying, exhilarating thought bloomed in my mind, fully formed and undeniable. I want to kiss her. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I had spent weeks building my fortress, and this quiet, patient woman hadn't stormed the walls. She had simply stood outside, humming to herself, and waited for me to open the gate. And God help me, I was reaching for the latch. The next 2 days were a masterclass in exquisite torture. The awareness of my attraction to Lena was a constant, thrumming presence beneath my skin. Every mundane interaction was suddenly fraught with a dizzying new layer of meaning. When she handed me a mug of tea, I was acutely conscious of the way her fingers brushed mine, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt straight to my core. I found myself watching her constantly, cataloging the small details that made her who she was. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on a sketch, the slight crinkle at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, the graceful, efficient way she moved through the small apartment, never seeming rushed or clumsy. My internal monologue became a relentless, looping battlefield. One part of my brain, the scarred, cautious veteran of the war with Sarah, screamed at me to retreat. Don't do this, you know how this ends. She's kind now, but they're all kind in the beginning. You are broken, and you will only break this too. But another part, a smaller, more hopeful voice I thought had been silenced for good, whispered back. But what if this is different? What if she is different? One afternoon, I was searching for a book and knocked a small ceramic bowl off a shelf. It shattered on the hardwood floor. Before I could even react, Lena was there with a dustpan and brush, carefully sweeping up the shards. "It's okay," she said, her voice calm as I started to apologize profusely. "It's just a thing. Things break." She looked up at me, her gaze steady, and it felt like she wasn't just talking about the bowl. Later that evening, the tension reached a fever pitch. We were sitting in our usual spots, me on the couch, her in the armchair, reading. The only sounds were the rustle of turning pages and the distant wail of a siren. I was pretending to read, but the words on the page were a meaningless jumble. My entire consciousness was focused on her. She had one leg tucked under her, and the soft glow of the lamp highlighted the strong column of her throat, the gentle curve of her shoulder. I wanted to trace the line of her jaw with my fingertips. I wanted to know if her skin was as soft as it looked. I wanted to lean across the space between us and breathe in her scent. The yearning was a physical ache, a hollow space in my chest that I knew, with a terrifying certainty, only she could fill. She must have felt my stare because she lowered her book and looked at me. Her expression was open, questioning. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with everything we weren't saying. It was an almost moment, a precipice. One word, one movement, and we would either step forward or pull back for good. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I opened my mouth to say something. What? I had no idea. When the shrill, jarring ring of my phone shattered the quiet, I flinched, scrambling for the device on the end table. The screen lit up with a name I never wanted to see again. Sarah. My blood ran cold. I hadn't blocked her number. In some sick, self-destructive part of my mind, I think I'd been waiting for this. For the final, brutal blow. I stared at the screen, frozen, as Lena watched me, her brow furrowed with concern. "You don't have to answer that," she said softly. But I did. It was a compulsion. I needed to prove to myself that I was over it, that she had no more power over me. I pressed the green icon and put the phone to my ear. "What do you want, Sarah?" Her voice, once the sweetest sound in the world to me, was now thin and sharp. "I just thought you should know I'm moving in with Derek." Derek, the spin instructor. She said his name like it was a prize she'd won. "I came by the old apartment to get the last of my things, and it's just so sad, Chloe, all your sad little plants and your sad little books. I really hope you're not still moping on your friend's couch. It's not a good look." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in the poison of our shared history. She knew exactly where to strike. The sad little plants I'd nurtured, the books that were my refuge, the couch that was my shame. I felt my throat tighten, the familiar hot sting of tears behind my eyes. I was right back in the wreckage, the debris swirling around me, choking me. "I have to go," I managed to choke out, my voice thick. "Right. Well, have a good life or whatever," she said with a dismissive little laugh, and then the line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I tried to hide it, turning my head away, but it was too late. The dam had broken. A choked sob escaped my lips, a raw, ugly sound. I buried my face in my hands, humiliated, furious, and so incredibly deeply sad. The couch dipped beside me. I felt a hesitant, warm weight settle on my back, a hand resting between my shoulder blades. It wasn't a pat or a rub, it was just a solid, grounding presence. Lena. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, her hand a warm anchor in the storm of my grief, and let me cry. The whole ugly story spilled out of me in a torrent of gasping breaths and broken sentences. The lies, the little cruelties, the way Sarah had made me feel small and foolish for ever loving her, for ever trusting her. When I finally subsided into shuddering, hiccuping silence, Lena still hadn't spoken. I risked a glance at her. Her face, illuminated by the soft lamplight, was a study in fierce, resonant empathy. There was no pity in her eyes, only a deep, validating anger on my behalf. "You deserved better than that," she said, her voice a low, steady rumble. It wasn't a platitude. It was a verdict, a truth I had been unable or unwilling to grant myself. Her words landed in the hollow space inside me and began, impossibly, to fill it. She moved her hand from my back, and for a panicked second I thought she was pulling away. But she only moved to gently cut my face, her thumb stroking away the wet track of a tear from my cheek. Her touch was electric, 1,000 times more potent than our accidental brushes in the kitchen. It was deliberate. It was tender. It was a question. I leaned into her touch, a silent answer. The space between us, which had been so charged with tension and unspoken want, now felt like the safest place in the world. I looked from her compassionate eyes to her soft, full lips. The last of my fear, the last of Sarah's ghost, just evaporated. There was only Lena, only this moment. "I haven't felt this scene in a very long time," I whispered, the words raw and true. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I see you, Chloe." And then the space was gone. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. It was a mutual surrender, a collision of need and want, and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Her mouth met mine, and it was nothing like I had imagined. It was softer, gentler. It tasted of the mint tea she'd been drinking and something else, something that was uniquely her. It was a kiss that didn't take, but gave. It was a kiss that said, "You are safe here. You can rest now." And as she deepened it, pulling me closer until my hands were tangled in her soft shirt and her arms were wrapped securely around me, I finally did. I woke slowly, drifting up from the first deep, dreamless sleep I'd had in months. For a moment, I was disoriented. The light was different, softer. The air smelled of sandalwood and clean cotton. Then it all came flooding back. The phone call, the breakdown, the kiss. Oh God, the kiss. And everything that came after. I wasn't on the couch. I was in Maya's bed, tangled in her duvet, and Lena was beside me, propped up on one elbow, watching me with a look of such profound tenderness. It made my heart ache. "Hey," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Hey," I whispered back, my own voice thick with sleep. A blush crept up my neck as the full reality of the night settled in. We hadn't just kissed. After the couch, she had led me here, to this quiet room, and we had simply held each other, trading soft, exploratory kisses and whispered truths in the dark until we had both fallen asleep. It was more intimate than anything I had ever shared with Sarah. "So," Lena said, a small, gentle smile playing on her lips, "that happened." I felt a smile of my own surface, the first genuine, uncomplicated one in what felt like a lifetime. Yeah, it did. There was no panic, no regret, just a quiet, humming certainty in the center of my chest. This felt right. She reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, her fingers warm against my skin. "No regrets?" she asked, her dark eyes searching mine. "Not a single one," I said, and the truth of it resonated through me. "Do you?" "No," she said, her voice firm. "My only regret is that Maya's coming home in 2 days." A small, familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The real world. Maya. The complications. But looking at Lena, at the calm strength in her face, the knot loosened. We would figure it out. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers moving with a new, decisive purpose. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Sarah's name. I looked at Lena, who watched me with a knowing, supportive gaze. Then I pressed delete contact and confirmed it without a second's hesitation. It was a small symbolic act, but it felt monumental. It was an erasure of the past and a clearing of the way for a future, a concrete step out of the debris. The last 2 days of our seclusion passed in a haze of quiet intimacy. We talked for hours, filling in the broad strokes of our lives, sharing stories that were both funny and sad. We cooked together again, the small kitchen no longer a space of awkward choreography, but one of easy, synchronized movement. We existed in a bubble of our own making, a temporary pocket of time where the outside world and all its complications couldn't touch us. But we both knew the bubble was about to pop. Maya was coming home. On our last night alone, we sat on the fire escape, watching the city lights blink on as dusk settled. The air was cool, carrying the scent of street food and exhaust fumes, a smell I was beginning to associate with this strange, transformative week. "What happens now?" I asked, the question I'd been avoiding hanging in the air between us. Lena was quiet for a long moment, twisting the silver ring on her thumb. "I was supposed to fly back to Seattle tomorrow," she said. My heart sank. "But I called the airline this morning. I pushed my flight back a few weeks." I turned to look at her, my breath catching in my throat. "You did?" She nodded, a serious, steady look in her eyes. "I did. I found a sublet online for a month not too far from here. It feels unfinished, you and me. I'd like to see what happens when we're not hiding out in my cousin's apartment." She reached over and took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine. Her touch was warm, solid, real. "I want to see what grows." See what grows. The words of the gardener, the patient builder of beautiful things. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was something better. It was a quiet, hopeful offer to plant a seed and tend to it together. It was a choice, and for the first time in so long, I felt capable of making one. I squeezed her hand, a silent, joyful affirmation. Hope, it turned out, smelled a lot like sandalwood and rain-soaked earth. When you've spent so long convincing yourself that you're not worthy of a safe harbor, how do you learn to trust the woman who builds one for you, right where you stand? If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like, subscribe for more, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.